It started with a crunch, screech, then a honk. I stepped out onto my porch just in time to see a Range Rover barreling down my driveway like it was trying out for NASCAR. A teenager in a varsity jacket locked eyes with me as he sped by. No wave, no nod, no hesitation. He swerved around my garage, zoomed past my dog Max, and exited onto the next street. Through a makeshift wooden gate I definitely didn't install. 30 seconds later, another car followed. Then another, one after the other like ants discovering sugar. My private driveway, curved, quiet, paid for with blood, sweat, and a very large down payment, was now apparently the neighborhood's new shortcut. At first I stood there stunned, coffee in hand, unable to compute what I had just witnessed. But when the last car honked at my recycling bin like it was in their way, I realized something chilling. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't an accident. This was an invasion, and they weren't done. 3 days earlier, life had been peaceful. My wife and I bought this corner lot house because of the secluded driveway. I worked from home as an industrial engineer, and serenity wasn't just a perk, it was a necessity. But now, with tire marks slashing across my hedges and headlights flickering through my office window, that serenity was under siege. And the invaders? They weren't burglars or vandals, no. They wore Lululemon, drove SUVs, and paid HOA dues. I found the first clue nailed to a wooden stake like a bad garage sale sign. It read, "Community Flow Access, temporary routing approved by HOA." The paper flapped in the wind, proudly stamped with a smiley face sticker and that ominous acronym, HOA. I wasn't born yesterday. I knew how HOA types worked, the kind of people who hold emergency meetings over mailbox colors. But I never thought they'd be bold enough to reroute neighborhood traffic through private property. So I did what any rational person would do. I walked down to the HOA office, which, fittingly, was located in a converted model home with too much faux wood paneling and a stale cookie smell. That's where I met her. Karen. Yes, her real name. Yes, she lived up to it. She smiled at me like she was offering me a scented candle sample. "Oh yes," she said sweetly. "We just needed a temporary solution while we redo Maple Drive. Your property is just so accessible." I told her, very clearly, that my land was not a shortcut. Her smile grew wider. "Actually," she said, tapping her iPad like it was the final word in a courtroom drama, "it's adjacent to the community boundary, which technically makes it a soft access zone, if approved by the board." She smiled like she was selling perfume, but her words stung like ammonia. I asked to see the law that said that. She told me I could view it at next month's meeting, right after the project would be done. I tried to keep calm. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding, but the next morning I woke up to something that erased all doubt. The HOA had built a temporary gate at the end of my driveway. Let me repeat that. On my land. Without permission, they had pulled out one of my hedges, laid down a layer of cheap gravel, and planted traffic cones like little plastic invaders. A wooden sign read, "Exit only, please drive slow," right next to my tulips. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a siege. Karen and her crew weren't just rerouting. They were claiming territory. I stood there, robe half open, hair a mess, holding my coffee like it was a weapon. I wanted to march down there and rip the whole thing out with my bare hands. But I didn't, because I had a better plan. I called my cousin Barry. Barry's a lawyer, not the kind that wears ties or says "objection" a lot. He's the kind with a barbecue stain on his law books and a legal filing cabinet in his garage next to his fishing gear. But when it comes to property law, the guy's lethal. I explained what was happening. He didn't even flinch. "Take pictures," he said. "Document everything. Don't touch the gate yet. Let them think they're winning." "And in the meantime?" I asked. He chuckled. "Let them drive. We'll make them pay for every inch." And just like that, I stopped being a victim. I became a tactical defender. If Karen thought she could win this with cones and PDFs, she was about to meet a homeowner who designed mechanical deterrents for industrial zones and had a cousin who read zoning laws for fun. By the third day, my driveway was less like private property and more like an off-ramp. I was sipping coffee on the porch when a full parade rolled through. 7 SUVs in a row, one honking because my trash bin dared to exist. One waved like I was a valet. Another leaned out the window to ask if I could move my mailbox because apparently it was hard to swing wide. A teenager with a gaming headset screamed into his phone as he rolled past. My dog Max barked until he was hoarse. I wasn't a homeowner anymore, I was traffic control. That evening I spotted Mitch, my neighbor, standing near the hedges like a man who just discovered termites in his walls. He walked up, voice low. "Look, I didn't want to say anything, but Karen's planning to make it permanent. She's already filed a petition to get the county to recognize your driveway as a community easement. Says it's an emergency access route. She's calling it Phase 2 of Community Flow." "How many signatures does she need?" I asked. 5. "She's got 2. Just needs 3 more." I nodded slowly, looked out at the gravel trail now carved through my lawn. They weren't just borrowing space anymore. They were preparing to steal it. And that was the moment I whispered to myself, time to fight with something stronger than words. There's a thing you need to know about me. I'm not just a guy with a mortgage and a hedge trimmer. I used to design mechanical deterrents for industrial facilities. Think steel barriers that stop forklifts dead, gates that detect unauthorized movement, and floor spikes that would make a tank reconsider. So when Karen decided my driveway was the neighborhood's new shortcut, she wasn't just picking a fight with a homeowner. She was poking a castle engineer. And a bored one at that. I didn't see my house as a piece of real estate anymore. It was a fortress. And like any good fortress, it needed defenses. Not the passive kind, but clever ones. Ones that made you regret ever trespassing. Karen was used to passive resistance. I was about to introduce her to passive-aggressive engineering. She thought she'd paved over a pushover. What she'd actually done was activate a man who owned more drafting pencils than friends. And I was just getting started. It got worse before it got better. 2 mornings later, I was brushing my teeth when Max started barking like someone had walked in wearing a meat suit. I looked out the bathroom window and almost swallowed my toothbrush. 4 guys in neon vests with community grounds crew printed on their backs were in my backyard. With power saws. BZZZZTTT. They were cutting through my fence. I threw on sweats, bolted outside barefoot, and shouted over the buzzing. One of them looked up, waved casually, and said, "Karen approved this, just opening up a flow path to the park trail." I stared at them, dumbfounded. Flow path? What does that even mean? This isn't a yoga studio. He shrugged, talked to Karen. And just like that they left, leaving behind a gaping 5-foot hole in my fence like it was a doggy door for minivans. I called the police. The officer who showed up was polite, even sympathetic, but after hearing the word "ho," his shoulders dropped. "Sir," he said, "unfortunately this might be a civil matter." Civil? They sawed through my fence. Yeah, but unless we can prove intent, it's a gray area. I stood there barefoot in my yard, wind whistling through my new community flow portal, and realized something horrifying. The law wouldn't save me, but blueprints might. I knew I had to go into the lion's den. So that night I showed up at the emergency HOA town hall meeting, armed with a giant poster board showing my property lines and a USB drive full of security footage. The clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs, stale cookies, that one guy coughing too loud. It had all the ambiance of a discount jury duty. Karen stood at the front like she was giving a TED talk. Sharp blazer, Bluetooth earpiece that wasn't even on, and a smug little smirk. "Tonight," she said, "we are excited to present our plan for community flow optimization." The projector flickered. A PowerPoint slide popped up in Comic Sans, yes, Comic Sans, with a bold header, "Temporary Easement Proposal, Parcel 74B. That's my land, my driveway, my name on the deed." She droned on about emergency routes and provisional designation, throwing in words like synergy and collaboration like confetti. Then she said the HOA board would be voting tonight to approve the proposal. I raised my hand. Ignore. I stood up and cut her off. That's not a road. That's my damn driveway, and I've got the plat map to prove it. I plugged in my USB. The projector filled with boundary maps, timestamps, video of the crew sawing through my fence. Some gasped. One guy dropped a cookie. Karen tried to recover. "Let's let the board decide," she sniffed. They voted, 3-2, in favor. Karen smiled like a cat in a birdhouse. But she'd just given me something better than a no, a legally documented yes. I called Barry the second I got home. "She did it," I said. "She pushed the vote through. It's on the record." Barry didn't miss a beat. "Perfect. She just created liability." "How so?" "She made a legal claim about your land without authority. That's false representation." Now, we don't just have property damage, we've got a pattern. And if we can get her to admit on record that she knew, we'll have her boxed in. So what do I do? "Give her rope," Barry said, "and let her hang herself." The next morning I found a letter taped to my garage. It was printed on bright white paper with flowery borders and a giant yellow smiley face sticker. "Dear homeowner," it began, "we are thrilled to inform you that the pilot phase of community flow routing is now underway. Please remove any personal obstructions from the driveway to allow smooth passage. Thank you for being part of a better tomorrow." No name, no signature, just arrogance in bullet points. I stood there, wind flapping the paper, garden hose coiled at my feet, watching another SUV roll past like I was the crossing guard. The message was clear: shut up, get out of the way, and smile while we run over your rights. But they'd forgotten who they were dealing with. That night, I started drafting what I would later call Operation Gravel Gladiator. First, I ordered industrial-grade gravel, the kind designed to rattle suspensions and make luxury tires scream for mercy. It would turn my driveway into an obstacle course from hell. Then I sketched out a spike strip system, motorized, retractable, solar-powered, hidden beneath a removable metal plate disguised with gravel. Controlled by a button in my pocket. As I sketched, I whispered to Max, "Let them drive." The blueprints weren't just diagrams. They were a declaration, a war plan, drawn in pencil and vengeance. They'd chosen the wrong guy, the wrong driveway, the wrong blueprint. And I was just getting started. There's a particular kind of joy only engineers understand, the moment when revenge meets schematics. I dusted off an old blueprint from my logistics days, something I once pitched for high-theft loading zones. A retractable spike strip system, solar-powered, remote-controlled. Illegal on public roads, sure, but on private land, that was a different story. I spent the weekend in my garage, wiring relays, welding support plates, and programming a Bluetooth trigger that synced with an old garage opener. The sound it made the first time I tested it, click, whir, hiss, it was beautiful. I even gave it a name, Operation Gravel Gladiator. Test number 1 with my own truck was flawless. I approached slowly, pressed the button, clunk. The spikes retracted just in time, smooth, elegant. Then came the real test. I raised the spikes, drove over them, and crunch. Both front tires hissed flat like a deflating ego. Mission accomplished. I patched my tires, reset the system, and buried the plate under just enough industrial gravel to blend in. No one would suspect a thing until it was far too late. It happened less than 24 hours later. I was sipping iced tea on the porch when I heard it vroom. Karen's white Range Rover coming down my driveway like she owned it. No hesitation, no slowdown. The Queen was cruising straight into my trap. I sipped, smiled, and tapped the button in my pocket. Hey, stop, crunch! Her tires hit the spikes dead center. The front end dipped like it was bowing in shame. The car rolled a few more feet, then stopped, sagging pitifully. Karen threw her door open and stormed out in stilettos, looking down like her vehicle had betrayed her. She looked at me, aghast. You sabotaged the road?" she shrieked. "It's not a road," I called back. "It's my driveway." "You'll hear from the HOA," she bellowed. "You'll hear from my lawyer," I smiled. Again. The next morning, a certified letter arrived, official HOA letterhead, triple-stamped and smelling faintly of Karen's perfume. The language was dramatic. You are hereby ordered to cease all hostile installations endangering the safety of the community. Hostile? I wasn't the one bulldozing fences and rerouting traffic. Barry responded with something better than a letter. He sent a binder, full property records, satellite images, a blown-up screenshot of Karen ignoring the posted private property sign. In legal terms, it was the equivalent of a mic drop. A few days later, I got another letter, this time from a different board member, one I'd never met. It was shorter, humbler, and unsigned. It read, "We'd like to avoid further escalation. Please attend the next meeting." Translation, Karen was losing her grip. The clubhouse was packed. Barry wore a Hawaiian shirt with pineapples on it just to be petty. Karen sat at the head table, bandaged and fuming, her Range Rover pictures taped to a presentation board like a crime scene. She started with her usual drama. He endangered lives, he installed a deadly device. Barry stood calmly, passed out laminated property maps, and pointed at the plat lines. Everything within this boundary, my client's, not yours. You voted based on a false easement claim, and that's fraud. One board member blanched. Wait, are we liable for this? Barry nodded. Oh, you're already in it. Now the question is, how deep? Karen tried to protest, but her voice cracked. For once, nobody backed her up. After that meeting, the shortcut traffic disappeared like cockroaches after the lights turn on. No more teenage drivers. No more SUVs waving like I worked valet. My driveway was silent, peaceful, sacred again. I walked Max along the edge just to enjoy the quiet. Even he seemed calmer. But in my gut, I knew this was just a pause. Karen wasn't done. The woman tried to sue a kid once for using sidewalk chalk. This wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Sure enough, the next week, I got a surprise visit that proved the fight wasn't over. A city sedan rolled up. A man in a yellow vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. "You the property owner?" he asked. "It depends," I said. "If you're from the IRS, I'm watering the grass for a friend." He chuckled. "County zoning. We got a report of unauthorized modifications, possible safety violations." He inspected the gravel, crouched near the spike plate. Clink, clink. He tapped it with a pen and raised an eyebrow. "Did you build this?" "Every inch." He let out a low whistle. "Looks like something I saw at a military checkpoint once." "Not bad." We went inside. I showed him the deed, the camera footage, and Barry's legal packet. He nodded through every page. "You're in the clear. It's your land. They've got no claim, and this is technically genius." He paused, then added with a grin, "Just don't electrify it." It started with a soft click, followed by the snip-snap of bolt cutters. My trail cam, set up days earlier, caught every second in crisp night vision. 4 silhouettes moved along the hedges like raccoons in polos, their heads ducked low, dressed in dark clothes, with no HOA logos in sight. One of them fumbled with the rear gate's padlock, then pulled out his phone to snap a picture of my garage keypad. That face? Todd, Karen's nephew. The same tech coordinator who once claimed he couldn't update a PDF. He was front and center in my footage, blinking, sweating, fumbling with tools, like he was auditioning for a suburban heist movie. They weren't enforcing bylaws, they were trespassing, plain and simple. And with those bolt cutters in hand, burglars in golf shirts. I sent the footage to Barry. His response? "It's Christmas. We've got them on intent, trespass, and unlawful entry. Let's not confront her, let's go public." Weeks ago, before this mess exploded, I noticed an awkward triangle of land behind my fence, overgrown, ignored, and technically unclaimed. When I pulled up the county records, I found it had reverted to public auction after a failed development. A few signatures later, and $600, 0 cents, lighter, it was mine. What Karen didn't know was that this plot, the precious flow corridor, was the keystone in her plan to reroute traffic through my property. All her emergency access arguments, all those printed maps and signs, they relied on claiming that triangle as community space. And now, I owned it. She based her power play on land she didn't even own, and I had the deed framed in matte black, waiting for the perfect reveal. The next board meeting was packed. Folding chairs filled the clubhouse, people stood along the walls, and the snack table was reduced to crumbs. Karen took the podium wearing her signature blazer and a forced smile, ready to dazzle with another PowerPoint about flow optimization. Barry and I waited at the back until she queued up a map, bright green arrows cutting straight through my land. That's when Barry plugged in his laptop. "If I may," he said smoothly. He tapped play. The screen filled with night vision footage, Todd, bolt cutters, keypad snapshots, gasps, whispers. A woman in the front row clutched her pearls. "Is that Todd?" One board member stood up. "I didn't sign off on that." Another muttered, "I'm not going down for this." Karen's face flushed redder than a tomato at a bake sale. "This is being taken out of context," she stammered, but the damage was done. One board member resigned on the spot. Barry just smiled. "Context? We've got timestamps, names, and actions. That's not context. It's evidence." With footage presented and legal pressure mounting, Barry filed a formal declaration to void any unauthorized easement. The board had no choice but to comply. The triangle lot was legally mine. My driveway? Not a road, not a thoroughfare, not community adjacent. County zoning agreed. I got the email at 9:14 a.m. All HOA routing plans involving Parcel 74B have been officially rescinded. The area is to be removed from future traffic flow planning. Barry had it printed, notarized, and framed next to the gravel driveway like a trophy. Karen's big plan? Dead in the water, or in this case, buried under gravel and legal filings. 2 days later, I hosted a barbecue, a big one. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months came out of hiding, some bringing beers, others bringing lawn chairs. Mitch brought cookies shaped like traffic cones. We had a banner, "Shortcut closed, party open." Even Max wore a vest that said, "HOA Border Patrol." I parked a cooler right at the end of the gravel strip where Karen's tires had once gone, and made it the drink station. Kids played cornhole in the yard. A local guy played acoustic covers of 90s rock. People weren't just here for the burgers. They came to breathe. They came to feel like the neighborhood was theirs again. Karen didn't show up, but we left a paper plate with her name on it, next to a burnt hot dog and a broken chip. Karen didn't come out of her house for 3 days. When she finally did, she walked past the gravel like it was a cursed artifact. Her usual wave was replaced with a stiff nod. No more letters, no more cones, no more flow optimization. The queen had been deposed, not by shouting or signs, but by gravel, footage, and a surprise land purchase. And now, the road was closed, the party was over, or maybe it had just begun. Just when the neighborhood thought the war was over, Karen struck back, not with trucks, but with typography. Her latest ambush came tucked inside the monthly HOA newsletter, buried between a baked bean recipe and a reminder to remove holiday lights by the 15th. She called it the Emergency Community Safety Ordinance, but it was basically a thinly veiled land grab. A new map was attached, professionally printed, laminated, and glossy. His driveway was labeled as Designated Secondary Egress Route. Emergency only. There was even a footnote in 8-point font, approved pending community compliance audit. He read it twice, then a third time, as if the words would dissolve with logic. They didn't. This wasn't an attempt to negotiate. It was a Trojan newsletter. Karen was trying to legislate her way back onto his land, using a forged map and the illusion of bureaucracy. She had redrawn the neighborhood like she was God, and Google Earth rolled into one. But maps, he knew, could be challenged, especially when they were fantasy. She didn't own the streets, she barely owned her porch. It was time to redraw her influence. Permanently. He marched into the county zoning office with the newsletter, the fake map, and Barry by his side. The same inspector from before looked up from his desk, immediately grinning like someone who knew Karen's tricks better than her own reflection. "What's she done now?" he asked, already cracking his knuckles. Barry spread the documents across the desk like he was unveiling the secret plans of a villain. John skimmed the ordinance, read the map, then leaned back in his chair and let out a belly laugh. She's not zoning land. She's zoning out of her mind. They walked through the implications together. False endorsement, misrepresentation of county boundaries, unapproved changes to HOA jurisdiction. Karen had effectively published a fake zoning update using a community bulletin. It wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. John stood and said, "We'll be at the next meeting, bring a projector." That was all the encouragement they needed. The final showdown wouldn't be behind closed doors, it was going public. Karen had fired her last shot, but the ricochet was coming and it was dressed in a county-issued clipboard. The clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs spilled into the hallway. People fanned themselves with dog-eared HOA newsletters as Karen, dressed in her power blazer and shoulder pads sharp enough to cut drywall, took the podium like she was launching a product. The banner behind her read, "Pathways to Community Harmony." The map she unveiled showed his driveway again. As the main emergency access corridor, she launched into her speech. Words like safety, flow, and unified action rolled from her tongue like practice propaganda. Then, just as she raised her clicker to show the next slide, a voice from the back cut through the room. "I have a few questions." John, in his bright yellow inspector's vest, stepped forward. Karen blinked. "Of course, please." He approached slowly, pulled the map off the easel, held it up, and said, "This map is illegal." A gasp swept through the room. "It implies county approval. It has none. It designates private property as public access. It can't. You violated multiple zoning codes, and we're opening an investigation effective immediately." The crowd fell into stunned silence. Someone dropped a cookie. Karen stammered, "It was just a proposal." Barry stood. It's funny because this proposal was mailed to every resident as an active ordinance. That's not a mistake. That's manipulation. A murmur of discontent spread across the room like fire licking dry leaves. The myth of Karen's authority had just shattered in real time, and the sound of it was beautiful. The board sat frozen. One member finally stood. "Alan?" The one with the receding hairline and a 1,000-yard HOA stare. He cleared his throat. "I move for a motion of no confidence in President Karen's leadership." The room exhaled, then erupted. Another voice added, "Seconded." A third. "All in favor?" Hands shot up. "Almost every one." Karen turned pale. Her jaw dropped. Her Bluetooth earpiece blinked like it was having a panic attack. "You can't do this," she whispered. But the board was already moving. Papers shuffled. The microphone was turned off. Someone passed around a printed copy of her newsletter, with phrases highlighted like a crime scene file. She tried to object, claimed this was anti-community sabotage, but her voice was swallowed by the murmurs of betrayal. For the first time she realized the crowd wasn't just watching, they were done listening. Her control didn't fade, it evaporated. Then came the final blow. Just as Karen prepared to storm out with whatever dignity she had left, the clubhouse door creaked open with a screech. A man in overalls poked his head in, clipboard in hand. "Is Karen Whitlow here?" he asked. Karen raised her hand slowly like she was expecting applause. The man nodded. "I'm with the tow yard. Got an order to repossess a vehicle leased under HOA funds. Misuse of community funds." He held up the form with the license plate listed clear as day. Karen's mouth opened, then shut. The board members turned to each other like jurors at the end of a trial. There was no argument. The evidence had arrived, on 4 wheels and a winch. Karen stomped out of the room to the sound of clapping, some hesitant, some gleeful. The man in overalls followed her. And like that, the engine of Karen's HOA reign stalled, sputtered, and got pulled onto a flatbed. The next day a letter arrived. Not from Karen, but from the HOA board. It was signed by all current members, except her. It read, "Dear homeowner, we deeply regret the actions taken by the previous board leadership. You are entitled to the full protection and peace of your property. Moving forward, the HOA will operate with full transparency and respect for property boundaries. We appreciate your patience, your persistence, and, frankly, your creativity." Attached was a framed apology plaque reading, "This driveway is not a road." But he had his own sign mounted beneath it. this one hand-carved from oak, sanded smooth, and sealed with varnish. It read, "Private property, violators will be spiked, shamed, and possibly fed burgers." Because the next community event wouldn't be a town hall, it'd be a celebration, and everyone was invited, except Karen. It started as a driveway, became a battlefield, and by the end turned into neighborhood mythology. Kids started calling it the death strip, half joking, half in awe. Teenagers dared each other to touch the gravel and take selfies beside the spike sign. One even posted a TikTok titled, "Where HOA Dreams Go to Die." Barry, never one to miss a moment, framed a printout of that video and hung it beside his office degrees like it was a war trophy. Neighbors whispered stories of the spike strip like it was an ancient artifact. Mitch claimed to have seen sparks fly. Mrs. Halberston swore her dog now growled any time they walked past it. And somewhere in the back of the clubhouse, someone had etched the words, "Here lies ego on a folding chair." But behind all the laughter and lore, there was a new respect in the air. A recognition that someone stood firm, not with fists or fire, but with blueprints, law books, and gravel. The shortcut may have vanished, but the lesson stayed. Karen's final act, her infamous safety ordinance, didn't just fail, it detonated. The county not only threw it out, but used it as a jumping-off point to audit the HOA's past 5 years of policy. Turns out, the shortcut debacle was just the tip of the iceberg. The county inspector, John, made it official. Karen's obsession with flow ended up clogging the entire system, he told reporters. Local officials began pushing for broader HOA oversight policies, citing the Gravel Kings battle as a case study. Ironically, Karen had sparked reform by being the perfect example of unchecked power misused. Her ordinance was repealed, her budget frozen, and her name became a cautionary tale in every neighborhood HOA Facebook group, from California to Connecticut. She was the lesson no one wanted to repeat. The HOA board, under pressure, reversed 3 policies Karen had jammed through, including the temporary access loophole. They issued reimbursements for fines, refunded misallocated funds, and initiated a complete review of all procedural votes taken during Karen's presidency. Barry, meanwhile, was on a roll. His inbox flooded with clients asking how to gravel king their own disputes. He even got invited to speak at a local civic summit titled Boundaries and Backyard Lawfare. And the best part, Karen was now facing multiple personal liability claims, one from the county, one from a neighbor whose fence was chopped, and possibly one from the towing company that repossessed the HOA vehicle she'd signed for. She'd wanted a legacy. She got it, just not the one she envisioned. 2 weeks later, he threw one last backyard barbecue, not out of spite, but out of victory. It wasn't a party, it was a statement. The banner read, "Shortcut closed, community open," and neighbors came in waves. Families brought chairs, kids brought cookies, Barry brought beer and bad jokes. Even John from the county showed up with a 6-pack and a smirk. Mitch grilled hot dogs, and someone hung a handmade sign on the spike strip control box that read, "Authorized personnel only, gravel royalty." People laughed, they shared, they started talking again, not about zoning, but about each other. For the first time in months, it wasn't about the HOA, it was about being a neighborhood. And Karen? She was gone. The house up for sale, the email deactivated, the Bluetooth earpiece hopefully permanently silenced. That night, when the lawn chairs were folded and the laughter had faded into the hum of a peaceful suburb, he sat by the edge of the driveway with Max by his side. The gravel sparkled under the porch light like tiny battle medals. Each stone, each spike, each boundary reclaimed was a reminder that sometimes peace has to be protected, not with war, but with wisdom. Not with noise, but with knowing where the line is drawn and standing on the right side of it. He looked at the now quiet entrance. No cars, no cones, no Karen, just home. And he asked himself, not out loud, just silently, what does it take to keep what's yours? The answer wasn't dramatic, it wasn't force. It was something better. Patience, planning, and a refusal to back down, even when someone in a blazer calls your land a flow zone. And so, that's the story. How a driveway turned into a war zone, and how standing up with a little humor, a lot of grit, and some gravel turned the tide. Because sometimes the thing worth defending isn't the land, it's the principle. The right to say no, the power to say this is mine, the courage to fight back when someone tries to turn your home into their shortcut. So the next time someone tells you it's just HOA rules, remember this driveway, remember the gravel king. And remember, don't back down. Don't let anyone rezone your boundaries. If you enjoyed this story, if it made you laugh or think, or even just fist pump at Karen getting towed, then do us a favor, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, because we've got more stories coming. Stories where the little guy wins, where justice wears boots and a smirk, and where every HOA tyrant meets their gravel-covered match. Until next time, stay sharp and stay spiked.